I'm a funny person to interview because I have so many books that talk explicitly about my life, so it always feels a little bit like all out there a little bit, you know? So this book, Jane, a Murder, first published 2005. It's about my aunt, the murder of my Aunt Jane, who was murdered in 1969. And the book, it documents what happened to her, and it documents my childhood with my sister growing up in the years directly after her 69 murder. But the first part of the book, which this poem is from, is it's kind of a portrait of me as the speaker moving towards the spectral presence of my aunt, because I understand more now as a parent than I did then, but it wasn't a story that was like readily told to me. So there was because it was a brutal story, so there was a lot of just looking at pictures going, who's that? You know, oh, my sister, what happened to her? She was murdered. Then like that end of conversation a little bit. So this is a poem about that. It's called First Photos. The only photo of Jane I saw while growing up hung in my parents' bedroom. She was wearing a long raincoat and standing on a stair against a tacky interior of bronze chevrons. It's a loose story. I was born in San Francisco, California, and growing up, yeah, I always wrote. So I never really chose to be a writer. It wasn't like a moment or anything. It just was who I am. And I grew up, and my parents divorced when I was about 8, and then my father died suddenly when I was 10. And I only mention those things because I think, you know, shortly thereafter, 11, 12, I probably started writing quite a bit for myself, and it was just a way of processing experience and whatnot. And stayed in the Bay Area till I was 17, and then went to college on the East Coast. And after college, where I studied writing and criticism and literary theory, I went in feminism and moved to New York City and to be a writer. And at that point, also, I was very interested in dance and performance. So I did some of that in New York, and eventually got a PhD in New York at the City University and started writing books. And I don't know, I think I just published maybe my 12th book. And at a certain point in 2005, I moved to Los Angeles for a job and stayed for love. And now I'm still there and teach there and write. Later, I will find out that Jane was wearing a long raincoat the night she was killed. What if it were the same coat as in the picture, the one I looked at all those years? I arrive at the New York Public Library with my 2 dates, the bare brackets of a life. I ask a librarian where I might find information about an old murder. Was it a famous murder, she queries? Not really, I say. It was in the family. My answer embarrasses me. She gives me little slips of paper which I fill out and roll up, then shove into silver tubes as long as pinkies. After dropping them down a hatch, I wait for the invisible staff to send up the dark blue spools of the Detroit News from below. When I was young, there was no internet, so self-publishing was all the rage. So I self-published a book of poems called Pacific, and probably 95 and 96. I had a girlfriend at the time, Cynthia Nelson, and we published a book together called Not Sisters. Our last names were both Nelson, and we were not sisters. And then I published a couple books of poetry, Shiner and The Latest Winter. Jane, a Murder was a book that I wrote, or at least worked on while I was in graduate school. I eventually went back to school because I just thought I should get a little smarter than I was feeling. So there was so much more I wanted to know about and study in a little bit more sustained fashion. So, and then wrote Jane then, and then actually I guess it wasn't until I moved to LA that I published a book on the New York School, The Red Parts, Bluets, The Art of Cruelty, like a lot of books that tumbled forth after that. Rat-a-tat, rat-a-tat, the spools rocket across the lighted screen. Ike fights heart set back, Blacks end long strike at college. Old foes Truman and Nixon hold a sentimental visit. We'll be on the moon by July. Then on March 22nd, 1969, Jane's face suddenly fills the screen. Her youth and aura like a new haircut, just blatant, raw, crushing. A headband keeps her brown hair back. Her lips are parted slightly. How she wants, how she penetrates, her eyes set back in her brow like my mother's, like their father's, dark, obedient, devouring. My face stares into hers, our thoughts frozen together on the cusp of a wave, just starting to go white cold, curl, and fall back into the spitting green. When I started looking at Jane, she was much older than me. How strange her face seems now, enlarged on this grainy screen, now that she will always be only 23. Yeah, writing Jane did a lot for my writing life because I'd written so many lyric poems, but I'd never tried to tell a story or hold a whole book together. And the book, it's a small book, but it still looks kind of thick, because it's so small. But and we wanted to make it small because it kind of echoed some of the true crime paperbacks that were in the books in kind of conversation about with representations of women killed by violence and sexual violence. And but yeah, I learned so much writing it. I learned about being brave with pursuing a topic, kind of no matter getting over what my family might think, and kind of claiming my own curiosity about the subject. I learned about doing research. I learned about writing about other identifiable humans, and then there was a lot about narrative and plotting, and also finding a book's real subject, because the initial question of what happened to my Aunt Jane obviously is not the most particularly fascinating question. There were other questions that had to be unearthed, and so writing the book was one of my first experiments, which I think has persisted since, and what any writer or artist goes through, which is initial questions and then a search for the right questions, or the real questions rather. This book, Bluets, is really dear to my heart. It was, I think, published in 2009 in the States, and I'd always wanted my whole life to write a book about the color blue, which I love very much. And I'd written 2 books about sexual violence, and then a third book, well, actually, it came out after Bluets, but about art and brutality that I'd been thinking about. And so I really wanted to write something that kind of was a catalog of things I found the most beautiful in the world instead of the most disturbing or ugly. So that's where this book started, and the blue seemed like the appropriate lens, So I'd collected so many blue things and blue stories, and I went to write them all down. And okay, well, this is the beginning of Bluets, and this book is in numbered propositions, and it goes like this. Number 1. Suppose I were to begin by saying that I had fallen in love with the color. Suppose I were to speak this as though it were a confession. Suppose I shredded my napkin as we spoke. It began slowly, an appreciation and affinity. Then one day it became more serious. Then, looking into an empty teacup, its bottom stained with thin brown excrement coiled into the shape of a seahorse, it became somehow personal. A lot of times the form of the book that I'm writing is not a given, so as I'm experimenting with what the form should be, I'll often just be trying to find other books that have a form that is something in the ballpark of what I'm imagining, So instead of it just being, I'm going to write a novel, here's the whole world of novels, it'll be like in the case of Jane, there were a handful of works of, what you might call documentary poetics that were important to me. There are 2 books by Michael Ondaatje, one called The Collected Works of Billy the Kid, and the other called Coming Through Slaughter, that are both poetry prose collages that try and capture the life of a dead person. And so as I was working on Jane, and as that was kind of the form it was coming out in, I'd often look around to be like, is there anything like this, and then finding those books was a great comfort, to be like, oh, you can do this, it'll be, there are many ways for a book to hang together. Sometimes you just need to see and feel how another book of unusual form hung together, just to be sure that you could do it. I mean, it's funny because my books have, as you say, like different themes. There's a book about the color blue, a book about cruelty in art, books about a courtroom drama, a book about making family and queer family, I mean, to me, because I'm just me, they seem fairly obsessively rotating around similar things. But I think, I don't know. I mean, I think curiosity is like a very sacred thing, and it's very easy to have it go dark. It's very. I think most of us enjoy feeling driven and on the trail of something, and I think it can be more bewildering and sometimes depressing when you don't know where your curiosity lies. So I guess I kind of feel like a student of my curiosity. Like I can't really, you can do things to enliven it, namely reading or talking to people or taking things in, and usually if I feel unsure of where what themes I'm curious about, I'll just go on a long spell of reading a lot of things that I feel instinctually interested in, and wait to see what comes up. But yeah, I mean, I think also one book kind of leads to the next, and that there's usually a question or a subject that has come up during the writing of one book that will then lead to the next, and then formally, sometimes I kind of stick in a similar vein for a little while, and other times I'm really tired of, like I wrote a book in 2021 called On Freedom, and it was a really long, thick, very heavily researched, very citational book about the notion of freedom in the art world, and conversations about sexual freedom, drug use, and climate conversations. And it took so long, and it wasn't kind of an accident that this little book Pathamata I wrote next just kind of slid out along the side with like no citation, very focused on dream life, very interiorly focused. I think just because I was like exhausted, so sometimes there'll be just a kind of hydraulics from one book to the next, 2. And so I fell in love with a color, in this case the color blue, as if falling under a spell I fought to stay under and get out from under in turns. Yeah, the Argonauts was not really it had the same dynamic I'm describing about a cluster of interests, which had been a cluster of interests in my life for forever. There's a lot of writing about queerness and queer theory, and then there was a lot of kind of meditations on like maternity, and I didn't really see how they fit together. And then ultimately I realized it was precisely like the combining of the two was the bridge that the book would make, in which case, just because, as you well know, like historically, for legal reasons and, discipline and punish reasons, gay people, queer people, there's not a rich body of writing about making queer family because it's been disallowed, or you take your kids away from you if you're queer, not like supported. So I think that therefore for a long time, even through my growing up, with the exception of, say, lesbians who'd had children with men and then divorced them and then had these children and then were radical lesbians and talked about maternity, but the maternity wasn't rooted in a queer relationship. It was rooted in something prior. Besides that, a lot of queer theory was understandably dedicated to the value of a life lived without procreation. And a lot of the no future queers also came out of AIDS, where there was literally no future, and that, that life expectancy with HIV was, virtually nil. And so I came up with that, and it was just, very specific to my historical moment, that the idea of not just participating in a future, but participating in, the posterity project of bearing children and raising them in queer family is a very, not that there's no precedent, but it was not. And so once I kind of saw that, I could imagine which anecdotes and which themes should be in this book together. 3, well, and what of it? A voluntary delusion, you might say, that each blue object could be a kind of burning bush, a secret code meant for a single agent, an X on a map too diffuse ever to be unfolded in entirety, but that contains the knowable universe. How could all the shreds of blue garbage bags stuck in brambles, or the bright blue tarps flapping over every shanty and fish stand in the world, be, in essence, the fingerprints of God? I will try to explain this. The book will always be a time capsule of a moment, and because, at the moment that I was writing, in what was, I saw the book once on like a list of, best books of the Obama era or something, but I didn't know we were in the Obama era, but that I think because the book kind of begins with, it begins in some ways with already a topsy-turvy about politics, because my partner and I are not married, and then there's about to be an election, which was the first time Obama was elected, but in California there was something called Prop 8 on the ballot, which was to invalidate same-sex marriage in the state. And the day before that election, my partner and I were like, maybe we should get married today, just in case Prop 8 passes tomorrow, which at first we thought it would not, but then as we got closer to the election, it looked, the polling was looking like maybe it would pass, and so we did get married that day, and Prop 8 did pass the next day, invalidating same-sex marriages, going forward, the ones that had already happened were now in legal limbo, but for the moment they were valid, which is why we got one. But, that, and then by the end of the book, it's not in the book, but then eventually there's a Supreme Court decision where, same-sex marriage is, in all 50 states becomes legal. But that the conversation during the time I was writing had so much to do with, a queer conversation had so much to do with, what will we do? How will we preserve our queerness and all the things that have made queerness great in terms of its, the threat that it poses to the social order and its threat to normativity. How will we preserve all that as we're getting all these rights, and then now you just fast forward 10 years from the book was in 2015, it published, now in 2025, and we're in this incredibly regressive moment, and the book sounds and looks totally different. I imagine 10 years from now it will look and sound totally different, and then 10 years from now, then, if any humans are inhabiting the planet in 100 years and the book is not dust, then it will sound and look entirely different, so that's, and I knew that when I was writing it, because, like I said, the sands were already shifting throughout the writing of the book, so. 4, I admit that I may have been lonely. I know that loneliness can produce bolts of hot pain, a pain which, if it stays hot enough for long enough, can begin to simulate or to provoke, take your pick, an apprehension of the divine. This ought to arouse our suspicions. I think part of why I'm talking about this capacity to see possibilities, which you could call optimism, but I'm not really calling it that. I think it's it's so important because it actually structures what we do, and what we do makes or breaks what happens next, So I worry about a kind of, I worry about the mood of collective apathy or despair. I think I do, just because it's so gripping and it's such quicksand, and because it's not what will help us, you know. And so I think, like, as a teacher and as a parent and for myself, I don't feel very skilled at it, but I want to get more skilled at just, you know, knowing what my part is in not contributing to it and contributing to things that make more possibility for turning so many of these things around that are going to just bring so much suffering, you know. You know, on the other hand, like, books are really great, right? Because, like, when it seems very small, but, you know, if we publish books, or someone's watching me on the Louisiana channel because they care about these things, or they're, you know, we are, like, watering the seeds of these communities that can make a difference. And if we don't hear that, we don't have each other, then we don't have anything, you know. 7. But what kind of love is it really? Don't fool yourself and call it sublimity. Admit that you have stood in front of a little pile of powdered ultramarine pigment in a glass cup at a museum and felt a stinging desire. But to do what? Liberate it, purchase it, ingest it? There is so little blue food in nature. In fact, blue in the wild tends to mark food to avoid: mold, poisonous berries, that culinary advisors generally recommend against blue light, blue paint, and blue plates when and where serving food. But while the color may sap appetite in the most literal sense, it feeds it in others. You might want to reach out and disturb the pile of pigment, for example, first staining your fingers with it, then staining the world. You might want to dilute it and swim in it. You might want to rouge your nipples with it. You might want to paint a virgin's robe with it. But still, you would not be accessing the blue of it. Not exactly.
What was the process?
Well, like I said, I've been collecting blue things for a long time, and I had a blue altar. I had a lot of blue stories about blue objects that I loved, and finally the moment came around for me to start trying to write it, and I was inspired by Sei Shonigan's The Pillow Book, you know, a really old book about Japanese. It's kind of a form where you list, you know, like, I was trying to do what she said she did, where, like, you wrote down at night, like, lists of, I mean, she wrote ugly things too. She would write list of things I saw at the palace today, or list of beautiful things, list of things to avoid, you know. So I was trying to do that, and then, but, you know, narrative kind of came seeping in the form of, when I started to write the book, I'd fallen in love with someone, and then the book is written as that relationship has fallen apart, and the narrator of the book is heartbroken and alone. 8. Do not, however, make the mistake of thinking that all desire is yearning. Goethe wrote, "We love to contemplate blue, not because it advances to us, but because it draws us after it." Perhaps he is right. But I am not interested in longing to live in a world in which I already live. I don't want to yearn for blue things, and God forbid for any blueness. Above all, I want to stop missing you. 9. So please, do not write to tell me about any more beautiful blue things. To be fair, this book will not tell you about any either. It will not say, "Isn't X beautiful?" Such demands are murderous to beauty. 10. The most I want to do is show you the end of my index finger, its muteness. When I say the most I want to do is show you the end of my index finger, its muteness, it's a kind of paraphrase of a Buddhist koan about pointing to the moon, and about the, like, difficulty of, in this case, like, the difficulty of, and you can't point to the beauty of something, like, and somebody else might think something's beautiful and you don't, and eventually it became clear to me that pain, you know, worked similarly. Like, we don't share each other's pain. We can't point to our pain. We can say it hurts here, but it's not particularly demonstrative. And so the book, and then love, similarly, like, you may still feel in love, and if the other person is not in love or the love has died, you know, where do you point to the love? Where do you point to the pain of heartbreak? So the book kind of became, through color, it became a meditation on heartbreak and pain as well as beauty, you know. So it was a good container. Once I found the numbered form, which was a kind of in-joke with myself about philosophy, Nietzsche and Wittgenstein and other philosophers I admire whose books proceed in numbered proposition, it became clear that was like the right form to hold this line of questioning, you know. 11. That is to say, I do not care if it is colorless. 12. And please do not talk to me about things as they are being changed upon any blue guitar. What can be changed upon a blue guitar is not of interest here. You're welcome. I haven't read that for a very long time.